All right, now that we have the basics of understanding how to edit, make our own kind of custom vector shapes in Figma. We can also and play around with the stroke and the fill options. Let's talk about how to copy and paste vectors from one Figma file to another. First of all, let's start with actually just how to copy and paste within your own document. One easy way is to go to Edit, Copy, Copy as SVG, and then Edit, Paste. You also could have used the duplicate option or Command or Control D. You also can do an Option or Alt drag, and that automatically makes additional vector shapes. You can also copy and paste between Figma files. So what I'm going to do is go over here, and I gave you a file called examplecat.fig, which is a vector file of a cat. I'm going to highlight that, edit, and copy. And then let's go back to exercise 9 and do a little edit, paste. All right. So, you can copy and paste. There's the vector file right there. So, I can bring in, vector files from one, composition to another. Let's take this guy. We can resize him. We can use this to flip graphic. Maybe I'll do an option drag here. Make a bunch of little cats. Okay. So we can easily copy and paste. Let's talk about editing a vector shape. So we know how to do some very, when you create a vector, you have what are called anchor points. Anchor points in a vector are what hold together segments. Okay. So, in other words, right here, there's an anchor there and there. These two anchors create this segment. There's another anchor there, which leads to this segment. There's another anchor there that leads to this segment. And there's another anchor there, or these two anchors create this segment. Okay. So, what I'm going to do, oops, I'm gonna, if I click and drag, I can move this around. By this, I mean the shape, and I can resize it. I can rotate it and such. But what I want to do is I want to be able to edit the subparts of this vector, which are those anchors that I just talked about. The way you can do that is by double clicking on this. So if I double click 1, 2, you might see how like I'm getting those like crosshatch, those horizontal or not, sorry, not horizontal, diagonal lines here. And if I click on this, this is highlighting an actual anchor. So, so this is an actual anchor right there that I have selected. And by moving it, what I can do is change the segments associated with that. The way I always kind of describe it is, so these anchors hold together these segments. By moving the anchor, you increase or decrease, change the direction and the length of the segment. The way I always kind of explain it is, if when you were a kid, you might have had like a pegboard where it's like you put little pegs and you put yarn around the pegs to form shapes. Imagine if you could take like one of those pegs out with the yarn still attached and like move it around, the yarn would move with it. That's kind of what's happening here. If I highlight this anchor, I can move it and change the shape. Okay, as I'm doing right here. You can actually add and subtract anchor points from this as well. So when you put your cursor inside, while you're in editing mode, by the way, you can tell whether you're in editing mode, double click because you're going to get this submenu that appears here. You hit this, then you're out of editing mode, or you can hit escape, I believe. Yeah. But while you're in here, you might notice that see how it's when I put this cursor, a little circle appears. So what this allows you to do is add an anchor to an existing vector shape. So if I click, I just added an anchor. And then actually while it's selected, I could click and move it. Okay. If I come in here, I'm going to click. You can actually drag it if you don't want it right in the center. And then I can move that anchor point. I can click and move that anchor point. Click and move that anchor point. Okay. So you can see how by adding anchor points, I can, adjust this vector shape and make it more complex. If you want to get rid of an existing anchor point, what you want to do is highlight it, and I believe, okay. So if I want to, sorry about that. I was looking it up real quick. I'm sure that dead air made for some great video. But anyway, what I need to do, if I hold down, so it used to be something else. Now it's Shift plus Delete. There you go. And that would remove an existing anchor point. So Shift plus Delete. There you go. So I can clicking adds it and allows you to move it, and highlighting it until it turns blue, and then Shift Delete would delete it. Okay. To get out of this, I'm going to hit Return. Another way to do that would be clicking on this little X here. If you click, if your vector shape has a curve associated with it, so you can see here I have an anchor point here, 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 and here. What I'm going to do is click on this one, and you might notice that I'm getting these little bars that are appearing. These bars are known as Bezier handles. Okay, if you're wondering why they're called Bezier, the guy who the concept of Bezier handle originally originated with an engineer whose name was Rene Bezier. He was a French engineer. And when you invent stuff, you get to name it after yourself. So it doesn't mean anything. It just happens to be the guy's last name. But what they do is Bezier handles control the direction and the intensity of a curve going in and out of an anchor point. Okay. So in other words, what's happening here is if I were to double click, I can select this, and these are actually my Bezier handles. Okay. This handle controls this curve going into this Bezier handle. This curve handles the curve going out of this Bezier handle. So I could move the anchor as a whole, but I could select this, and you can notice that by doing this, I can change the intensity, making the curve bigger or making it more linear. And I could change the direction of it as well. Now you might notice that sometimes it appears like the two Bezier handles work together. if you want to be able to work with them separately, one easy way to do this is while you select, hold down the Option or Alt key, and that lets you essentially break the handles so that they're not necessarily opposite of each other. And this allows you to get more freedom in how you apply your Bezier handles. Okay. Where are we? All right, let's go to exercise. Maybe I didn't All right, so we talked about adding and subtracting. So you can add anchor points to an existing vector shape. I could hold down Shift plus return. By the way, let's just kind of play around with this with some of the existing things here. So like if I were to, I don't know, create I don't know, let's make a triangle shape. If I go to edit mode, I'm adding an anchor here, add an anchor, pull that in, add an anchor, pull that out, add an anchor, pull that in, pull that in. So you can make some unique shapes here. Hit return when I'm done. So you can see I could start with a very basic shape like a triangle or a square and kind of add anchor points and make your own unique shapes there. What if I wanted to, you might notice that I keep kind of having these, sometimes I have linear lines, and by linear lines, I mean like, my lines are like this, and then sometimes I have anchor points and I kind of have a curve. So it's like, do you want to have, so I can have the same three anchor points. One, two, three, one, two, three. And I could have the lines being linear like that, but I could also have the lines being curved like that. So what I'm going to do here, let's go back. Um, Sometimes you're going to have linear lines and sometimes you're going to have curved lines. We may want to switch between them. So what I'm going to do is open up exercise 12. All right. So this, if I double click, I can see all the anchor points here. We talked about how you can, manipulate anchor points of a vector shape. Or I could even add anchor points to manipulate this shape in some way, shape, or form. Let's talk about converting linear lines to curved lines or vice versa. So right now, this segment and this segment are straight linear lines. What I could do is if I wanted this one to be curved, I'm going to highlight this anchor point. This linear line and this linear line are coming into it. And I'm actually going to go down here to this thing called the bend tool. And when I use the bend tool, I can drag out Bezier handles. And this allows me to have a curve, and the Bezier handles control the direction and the intensity of the curve. Once again, you'll notice that so this handle controls the curve going into this point. This handle controls the curve going out of this point. By default, usually in most vector programs, when you have Bezier handles, they work opposite of each other. But if I don't want them to be opposite of each other, what I can do is once again, hold down the Option or the Alt key to break this. And you can see I'm kind of manipulating each handle individually now. Oops, I don't know why that's happening, but let's kind of break it. That's weird. Okay. So I can use this to kind of pull out Bezier handles as I kind of see fit. Maybe I just need to hold down the Alt key. There you go. Okay. Now, if you want to go back, if I just click on this once, I go from curved lines to linear lines. So you can go from linear lines to curved lines or curved lines to linear lines. In fact, if I were to make a ellipse, ellipses essentially have one, two, three, four anchor points. If I were to use the bend tool here, I could basically make this into a diamond type shape. Or I could pull out Bezier handles, which essentially make a rounded shape and make basically an oval type shape. Okay. All right. Last major concept that I'm going to talk about when it comes in terms of vectors is the ability to combine vector shapes to each other. Okay. This is called a Pathfinder tool. So a Pathfinder tool is the idea that you can take a vector shape, I guess I don't have one here, and combine it with other vector shapes to make more complex vector shapes. So let's try this out. I'm going to go to exercise 13, and I'm going to zoom in here. So I have two vector shapes here, a red square and or sorry, a red star and a green square. Okay. And they're sitting on top of each other. And what I'd like to do is kind of take these two vector shapes and push them, combine them together to form a more complex shape. The way I like to think of it is like, think about making cookies. You ever make Christmas cookies and you take out the little Christmas cookie cutter and you make like a tree and you like mush it together with like a snowman and make like this mega shape. It's kind of like that, but instead of dough, it's vector shapes. So what I'm trying to do is like make a much more complex shape because right now, if I were to take this and pull it down, I'm affecting this shape, but I can't affect the one behind it because they're technically two different shapes. So what I'm trying to do is combine these together so I can make a more complex shape that I can edit as one. Okay. So what I'm going to do, highlight one shape and then hold down Shift and highlight the other. So both vectors are being attached or combined. And then what I'm going to do is go to the top here, and I'm going to go to this thing that kind of looks like two squares on top of each other. It's called Boolean operations. And I'm going to choose the one that says union. And when I do that, what happens is it forms this seemingly combined shape there that's made up of the two shapes. Now, at the moment, they're kind of acting as one, but I can't edit them as one. So what I need to do is something called a flatten. I'm going to click on this and choose flatten, and that's actually going to make this one solid shape. So I can change the color of the whole thing. And if I were to edit this, you can see how this now edits as one. Okay. When you combine two shapes, or using the Pathfinder options, the Boolean operations, the way it works is whichever object is on top, that is the fill that's kept. You can only have one fill. So you're going from having each shape with their own individual fill, and then they're now being combined. They can't keep this, they both can't keep their own fill. So the way it works is whichever one is on top, that's the one that's kept. So because the red was on top, that was the one that was kept. If I were to put the green on top and combine the two using flatten, oops, let's combine these first as union and then flatten this. Okay, you can see how this time it's green. You can combine multiple shapes. So here in group two, I have a purple circle, red circle, and yellow or orange circle. I'm going to combine all three by holding down Shift to select all three. I'm going to go under Union. That makes one shape. They're still technically independent of each other, even though they're considered one. I don't really like this kind of, I like it when I'm doing this to be able to edit them as one solid shape. So why don't we take this and we're going to flatten it. Oops, by going to flatten. This is now one shape. So if I were to, edit the anchor points there, you can see how it edits the entire shape. All right, same thing going on here. I'm gonna highlight this shape, hold down Shift, grab that shape, go to Union to combine it as one, and then to make it one solid shape, let's flatten it. Okay. All right, so this is your ability to take simple shapes and combine them into a more complex shape. So I could come in here, make a rectangle, maybe I'll make a star shape. Maybe I'll make a triangle for some reason. All right, I can hold down Shift to highlight all of these. I'm going to do a union to make this one solid shape. Now they're still considered independent, so I'm going to actually flatten this. And so this is now considered one solid shape. So I made this shape just by combining various pieces together. Okay. All right, last thing in terms of creating graphics, there is also so that was the union or the uniter. There's also a subtraction as well. Did I not upload it properly? So what I'm going to do here, this is kind of, I got group one here. Here I have one vector on top of another vector. And what I'm going to do is use this vector as a tool to cut through the one below it. So I was talking earlier, kind of like the idea of like I was using kind of the idea of like cookie dough, right? Where it's like you take two pieces of cookie dough and mash them into one cookie dough. In this situation, this vector is going to act like a cookie cutter, and it's going to cut through the vector that's below it. So the way it works is whichever you put the object that you want to use as the cutter on top, hold down Shift, and I'm going to go under Subtract. And you can see now that I've basically put this on top. This is now a hole. Now, like with the add, I can still technically move this around. I don't want that to be happening. So what I'm going to do is flatten this into one solid shape. Oops. Okay. You don't have to necessarily go through the solid object. Here I have a blue circle on top of a red circle. I'm going to highlight this, hold down Shift. So I'm going to cut the blue circle out of half of or part of the red circle by using Subtract. Now it's still technically it's still there and I could technically move it. So I want to make this a permanent by going under, oops, going under flatten. Okay, and that makes this nice crescent moon shape. So once again, you can use this to make some interesting complex shapes. Maybe I'm going to grab this and I don't know, let's grab another shape. I'm gonna make this a different color just so you can see it. Not that it necessarily changes anything. I'm gonna take this, do this. Let's subtract the red one from the gray one by using subtract and then flatten it. Okay. Maybe I'm gonna put a little circle here. I'll use union, flatten it. All right, so you can see how I can use, simple shapes and combine them by either, using union or subtraction to make a complex shape. Okay? All right. Last thing I'm going to talk about is how to export out of Figma. So the default file of Figma is a .fig file as such. Okay. That being said, a .fig file is not usually read by most other programs, whether raster, or vector. So you're probably going to want to export out of Figma. So right now, this is actually a vector-based, I have this vector here. And let's say I want to get this out of Figma to take into another program, maybe like Adobe Illustrator, or maybe eventually like Adobe After Effects. What you can do is take the canvas or the frame as a whole and highlight it. You can do that very easily by clicking on the name here at the top left. And I'm going to go under Export. And if you click the plus sign, this allows you to export your frame in whatever format you choose. Okay. So under Export, the one option that you want to choose here is called the SVG. The SVG is a scalable vector graphic. This is a vector format that's typically used in web design and things like that. So it is a vector format. We don't have the AI option that we had in Adobe Illustrator. EPS would be another good one. I'll show you how to do that. Unfortunately, that's not an option I can do directly out of Figma. But what I could do is take this, make sure SVG is chosen, and then click on the export. And then what that actually does is export this as a file. So here's my SVG file that I just outputted. Any program that can accept an SVG, I can now bring this into. So for instance, Adobe Illustrator, I am going to import that file that I literally just exported, which exported as elephant.svg, and you can see I brought it in here as elephant svg. You can also, if what this number here does under, this allows you to change the scale of your document. Remember that vectors can be scaled up or down. So if you wanted to, for instance, make this 4 times the normal size in terms of the dimensions, you could easily do that when you export. In addition to exporting as a vector format, you might want to export it as a raster format so that it's easily brought into non-vector programs. So for instance, if you were bringing it into a program that didn't accept vectors, like an SVG, but it might accept like a raster graphic, like a JPEG or a PNG, then you might want to change this to a PNG or JPEG format. I'm going to keep it as a PNG. And now when I export it, it exports as a PNG. And so as long as you bring it into some sort of program that can work with pixels, like Adobe Photoshop or Photopea, you can see now there's the same graphic, but now it's built out of pixels. Okay. Why would you want to do this? Like I said, some programs don't deal with vectors. So you might want to export it as a raster. The other thing is there's some things you can do in raster programs that you can't really easily do in a vector program. So for instance, raster programs have really easy ways of applying effects. I could come in here and do like this, I don't know, sort of distortion effect or stylize. So I'm doing like this oil paint kind of whatever effect. So this is kind of easier to do in a program like Photoshop or Photopea, where this would not be really possible if when it was kept as a vector. Because to get to the level of detail like this, you need to have a lot of subparts. You need pixels, which just wouldn't work in a vector format. Okay. Now, I will tell you for this class, we are eventually using Adobe After Effects. And in fact, for some reason, don't ask me why, Adobe After Effects does not accept SVGs, even though it is an open vector format. So what you can do, there's this website you can use called converto.co. And what you could do is if you exported your thing as an SVG, we could then convert that into an EPS file. An EPS file is another sort of open vector format that could be used. So what I would do is click here, and I'm going to find that elephant.svg, and then just make sure it's being set to EPS. So if you go under vector, this is where you can find the EPS format. And I'm going to hit convert, give it a second or two, and then I can download it. So now I have that elephant file not only as an SVG, but also an EPS file. By the way, Adobe Illustrator can also open up EPS files. So if you want to be able to work with that, you can see there's my EPS file there. Okay. So that is the remainder of working with basics of vectors. We can combine vectors together using what's called a Pathfinder tool to make more complex shapes. And we can also bring stuff out of Figma. Traditionally, that would be brought as an SVG. You can also convert it to a raster if you want to. Um, or if you want to do it as an EPS, because eventually, not that we're doing this right now, eventually you might want to convert this to an EPS file, so you can bring it into something like Adobe After Effects. This website is a good place to kind of do that. Okay.